Good morning and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, a Raleigh, North Carolina police officer has been fired for his role in a number of drug arrests that later had to be dismissed and required the city to settle a lawsuit with the more than dozen African American men who were wrongfully arrested. We discussed the implications of that with our panel this morning. But first, of course, we look at the news headlines of the day. A star African American athlete in New York has left his high school after an assistant athletic director told him he became fast by running from the police. Tony Humphreys, a 16-year-old junior who has already committed to play baseball at Boston College, told reporters that the incident occurred after he joined Iona Prep's track team in the offseason. He comes up to me and asks, "Why was I doing track?" Humphrey said of the assistant athletic director. "It never hurts to gain speed," Humphrey said. He responded, but the educator implied Humphrey was already fast enough and he had a reason. Humphrey said the assistant athletic director said the teenager gained that speed by running from the police. After Humphrey told his mother about the incident, they decided he would transfer from Iona Prep, a private school in New Rochelle, New York. He transferred to a public school near their home in Cortland, New York. Humphrey said it wasn't the first time he experienced racism at Iona Prep. He says, "My freshman year, I took it up with the deans, I took it up with the higher ups, and nothing happened to the other student." On Tuesday, other students at Iona Prep staged a walkout in support of Humphrey. Iona Prep announced in a letter to parents that the unnamed athletic director, accused of making the remark, has resigned. So again, a situation where there is just remarks made by educators, by those who are supposed to take the lead. Here's a statement I'm seeing now from Tony Humphrey. "I will be continuing my high school career at home, pumped return to Walter Panis, and will bring a championship back to Cortland." And that's the attitude of this young man, Tony Humphreys, as you see there on the screen there. He has updated a statement. It's really a shame. And this young man is extremely, extremely talented. At 16 years old, he's already signed, as we said earlier, a letter of intent with Boston College to play baseball. And that's an amazing program at Boston College. So we probably not long from now will be seeing Tony Humphrey in the major leagues. Our next topic. This morning in the news, fireworks filled the sky over Barbados on Tuesday as the Caribbean island nation declared itself the world's newest republic, lowering Queen Elizabeth's flag as it severed colonial-era ties to the British throne to the sound of jubilant gun salutes. Republic Barbados has set sail on her maiden voyage, Dame Sandra Mason said in her inauguration speech as the first president of the country, recognizing the complex, fractured, and turbulent world it would need to navigate. She said, "Our country must dream big, dream and fight to realize them." The former governor general told those gathered for the ceremony, including Britain's Prince Charles, the new era for the nation of 285,000 people ends Britain's centuries of influence, including more than 200 years of slavery until 1834. Addressing the matter during the handover, Charles acknowledged the mark slavery had left on the two countries. He says, "From the darkest days of our past and the appalling atrocity of slavery, which forever stains our history, the people of this island forged their path with extraordinary fortitude." A long-running pandemic curfew was suspended to allow Barbadians to enjoy festivities, which included projections at various points across the country and large fireworks displayed, timed to mark the historic occasion. The Pride of Nationhood ceremony itself was closed to the wider public, but Barbados' most famous citizen, superstar Rihanna, took her place alongside top officials for the event, complete with military parades a mounted guard of honor and gun salutes. One of the first acts of the Prime Minister of the new Republic was to declare Rihanna a national hero of Barbados. And of course, he used some of her own words to salute her. He says, "May you continue to shine like a diamond and bring honor to your nation." So the Barbados is celebrating this morning their freedom from British rule. What a day for the folks of Barbados. And of course, Rihanna getting saluted there, deservedly so. She has really carried that country's flag, if you will, more honorable than any statesman. This morning, we're going to talk about this issue that is really alarming. A North Carolina police officer in Raleigh has been fired. A police detective, Omar Abdullah, fired for his role in a number of drug arrests that later had to be dismissed and required the city to settle a lawsuit with the men who were wrongfully arrested. It's been more than 15 falsely arrested, falsely imprisoned, and of course, they are Black men. Let's bring on the publisher of Texas Metro News and iMessenger Media, Cheryl Smith, to discuss this. Good morning, Cheryl Smith.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, Cheryl. We really appreciate it. I know that you were being brought up to speed yesterday on this case out of North Carolina. Wanted to get your initial reaction when you saw this.
That this isn't isolated. And it's not just North Carolina. We can go across the country and find similar cases. And of course, Texas is at the top when you consider the wrongfully convicted. And we've had people who have spent decades. And this is really unfortunate. It's very sad. Am I surprised? No. The truth is coming because, you say in prison that everyone says they're not guilty. And it's becoming more and more true that a lot of them are not guilty. And then there are people in prison who take a guilty plea to keep from doing more time. So we've taken away folks' lives. And I'm sorry that they're only going to get $2 million. This is an atrocity. $2 million, 15 people, and that there aren't more criminal charges. And, we can look at Florida, a number of other states where people have been found, where there have been officials that have lost their jobs. But guess what? You still have the unions fighting for their pension. And that blue line still protects them, even though they're wrong.
Yeah. And authorities said, Cheryl, that between December 2019 and May 2020, so really a small window here, that this detective used an informant named Dennis Leon Williams Jr. on controlled drug buys that led to 15 Black men, at least 15 Black men, being arrested and put in prison on drug trafficking charges. But lab tests showed that the drugs Williams used in the transaction weren't illegal narcotics. He failed to get the transactions on video also. So they finally did drop the charges against these 15 men. But like you said, it's the harm that it has done and the repercussions, right? Because we see this and Black people see it, Black men, and particularly as you were stating, we see this happening, not just in North Carolina, but something like this makes you wonder, well, what's happening in Texas? What's happening in New York? What's happening in Florida and Baltimore and Oakland, California, where there's predominantly Black folks that live there, right?
Definitely. And we can't play this down because what is so frustrating is that there are still some people who are probably saying they deserve to go to prison anyway. And the informant, you get them on little petty charges and they become informants and do deals that take people under. We're looking at the whole conspiracy around the murder of Malcolm X and what has come out recently. And you just see how we get caught up. But guess what? Stacey, there are people who still see if you were in jail, they think you did something. If the police stop you, you did something. And this is not always the case. And especially with Black people, we are expected to acquiesce. Look at what happened in Oklahoma with Black women getting raped, and but people using those badges. And there's nothing more dangerous than some of these people who are allowed to have badges and guns and patrol our community. There are some wonderful people, and I look at what has happened with law enforcement, and when you have good officers. But you know what? I don't care how good you are. If you know bad is going on and you say nothing, you're bad. And that is what has happened. There are accomplices. And not only should this detective lose his job, he needs to be brought up on charges. And these cities and states need to start taking these pensions instead of settling and almost bankrupting their city for these rogue cops.
Yeah, I think you hit on something there too, Cheryl Smith, that if they were to penalize them in such a way, taking away their pension, I think it could make a difference. Many say it could make a difference. Also, we talk about and we hear so much about this qualified immunity.
Yes.
That's another big thing that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act set out to change, because without that qualified immunity, perhaps you'll have less and less incidents where police are shooting an unarmed person. Police are doing things like this detective did.
Right. Like, I mean, the Chauvin, what happens with his money? What happens with his accomplices? And it's, they say, see something, say something. And that's what even police officers are saying. But then we have to also consider, and there was a suicide in Louisiana. There's a lot of pressure on, especially police officers of color, because they're not treated equal, just like in the military and big organizations where we're just our numbers are just increasing, or they've been around for a while, but those who are in a position of power don't look like us, don't care about us, and treat us poorly. We have a book out about over 25 Black men who spent almost 30 years in prison for crimes they didn't commit. And we had a corrupt system. Thankfully, a lot of times journalists have helped to exonerate folks. We had the brother who spent it was painstaking to hear the brother spent all this time in prison, and people don't say anything about it, but it was for sexual abuse. And he talked about coming out and being too old to have children with his wife. And you just think about what has been stolen from so many of us. And, pictures in my mind come. I mentioned Money, Mississippi to you before we came on, because I spent a weekend with Mamie Till Mobley and her husband, who was Emmett Till's barber. And just, her talking about how she tried to prepare her son for, especially when you come from the North, and I'm from the North, so I know how it was when I had to come and visit my relatives in the South. There were things you said, we didn't say ma'am back in the day up North. And so we did say sir for some reason, but we didn't say ma'am, but just learning how to navigate. But all the navigating in the world does not help you when you get stopped by somebody who has bad tendencies, who are bad from the core, but they have psychological problems, but they passed the psychological test to become police officers. Qualified immunity is important in our communities. Citizen review boards with subpoena power are important, and we have to start holding people accountable on all. You don't get a pass. You do not get a pass when you're assaulting our community the way it is being assaulted.
Yeah, and again, listening to your commentary on this, it brings a lot of things to mind, including the word reparations, right? And why does it bring reparations to mind? Because you described an incident where unjustly a Black man or Black woman is either killed or in this case, they were taken to prison unlawfully, unjustly, no evidence planted on them. Now, and you talked about the psychological effect, and you can't really put a price tag on that mental anguish, can you?
I wouldn't even try to. Just thinking, we don't know what goes on if you've never been incarcerated. And I was telling some students yesterday that I had been arrested, and they were like, "Really?" And I said, "Well, it was for protesting." And so they said, "Well, I could see that." And just being confined, what it starts to doing to you. And there are people. Joyce Ann Brown is no longer with us, but she spent 9 years, 5 months, and 24 days in prison for a crime she didn't commit. And we had a corrupt system. There was information that was actually withheld. It wasn't until 60 Minutes, featured her story that everything started falling apart. And she would talk. She made me understand those who are behind bars more, because we tend to forget them. And there are people in the inside who are treating those who are incarcerated like they are animals. Well, for me, that says, number one, if we treat them like animals, some of them are going to get out one day. You can't be treated like an animal for almost all your adult life and then come out and then we expect you to be the so-called normal. So that's psychological effect. And she talked about people who, for example, they lived a different life in prison, and they come out and she would see them and they would hug, and they would say, they had a signal. They would say something like, "My prison life was my prison life." And they're basically telling you what I was doing in there. Let's keep it there. So when people say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, I really think it originated in prison, because
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you see what happens. But the psychological effect, logical effect, there are a number of the men who came out of prison in Dallas. Many of them got money. Joyce Ann did not get any money. She was
yeah.
fighting it until her death, but she did not get money, even though they showed this stuff information was withheld. But these men who are they might as well be young men who join a professional team, like maybe Mr. Humphrey is going to do in years come, and they get a lot of money. They aren't prepared to deal with. They haven't had those financial literacy courses. They don't know what to do with their money. There are people, predators, waiting to take advantage, and folks who never wrote them or had anything to do with them during their incarceration. Those same people are coming there to get money from them, and so some of them are victimized again and again. Others have started foundations. And guess what? Just like Joyce Ann Brown did, they're trying to help because they know everyone behind bars is not guilty. Some of them. And then on top of that, there was a case. I don't know if you remember Carter boys. There were high school boys in Dallas, and there was a
Yep.
movie made about it. And the judge gave them the harshest sentences that he could give. And you're looking at these young, like Jesse Armstead did not go to prison. They said, he wasn't involved and everything. There was a movie actually made about it where they exposed a lot of things. And you saw the disparity in when white boys get into trouble and black boys get into trouble. And I venture to say, because of reports that I received, I was a much younger journalist then, but I got the calls talking about those young men being abused in prison. And then you see folks getting out, you see rapists getting out, and you see judges, and we're not holding them accountable. The best way we can hold them accountable, Stacey, I would venture to say, is to vote.
Yeah, and Cheryl, you again, you're raising these points, and for those who are joining us late, we are discussing the officer in Raleigh, North Carolina, who had really what turned out to be phony drugs planted on 15 black suspects, causing them imprisonment, and also as they brought out in their lawsuit, they lost jobs. It was family dissension and other things. And so we're discussing the psychological impact of this continually happening. And you mentioned the injustices, and let me say this, because and this is not a testament of someone's guilt or innocence, but I've got to bring up two in a sense it is, right? Because I got to bring up a parallel case from Hollywood, right? So we saw it the other day. We talked about it on this program that the prosecutor in the Bill Cosby case had taken the case. Now he has taken the case to the Supreme Court. Now Bill Cosby was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. He's 84 years old. He served just about 3 years when the Supreme Court said, nope, that was illegal. They should never have prosecuted him in the first place. This prosecutor, who throughout the trial seemed to have this, was bent, his view was skewed by what appeared to be Cosby's race and his money. Now, I mentioned Cosby, you got him, and he's very much condemned. And a lot of people says, well, he deserves that. Well, whether you believe he deserves it or not, let's stand Cosby here.
Yes.
Now, on this side, you have Roman Polanski. Back in, if people don't know Roman Polanski, he's another big Hollywood icon. Back in 1977 or 78, I believe, he violently raped a 12-year-old girl, and he fled. He fled to France, and since he's been in France, he's a fugitive from U.S. justice, right? He's won Academy Awards. He's won the acclaim and the love of people throughout Hollywood. There's no outcry. Even with the Me Too movement, there's been no outcry to bring Roman Polanski to justice for the violent rape, which he was convicted of. And then they gave him bail and he fled. The violent rape of a 12-year-old. And yet you have on this side, again, like I said, people, oh, Bill Cosby deserves to be in prison. Well, that might be so if you believe he's guilty. But what about Roman Polanski? So here's the thing. As you said, for African American, particularly men, and if it wasn't for the Innocence Project, right, and the Civil Rights Movement, how many of us would still be locked up? How many of us would be locked up for things we haven't committed, crimes we haven't committed? How many more, I should say?
And that's, I mean, when you look, there's a Kansas City police chief who they're investigating now because of similar allegations. And then also in Florida, you know, you have folks trying to make the numbers look good. And so what was in like Biscayne, Florida, they were dealing with issues. It's going on. This in Biscayne Park, Florida, the police chief just wanted people to feel safe, he said, and knowing that they had 100% arrest rate or whatever, regardless of if the people were guilty or not. And that's one thing, you know, we talk about psychological, and I hate to throw so many things out there, but we really have to
throw it out there, Cheryl. Throw it out there.
We have to really educate our people, even when they go in, when they're going to court. Don't dress like what they say the perpetrator look like. If you're going to court because they say a 7-Eleven was robbed and the person had on a purple hat,
baggy pants
and a white wife beater, don't go to court dressed that way. You know, I have seen trials where the guilty person has showed up in a courthouse dressed looking like he could have been from the Fruit of Islam, or he could have been a stellar student, because they dressed to try to have an impact on the jury or the judge to show, you know, I've been on a witness stand before, and there were images that I was trying to portray, and I dressed accordingly. But we have to learn the system a lot better, and we have to stop throwing our people under the bus and saying, oh, they look guilty.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
If you don't know them, so how do you know what their look is? They may look that way all the time. And
well, look at the stresses. Look at the stresses that a black person, black man and woman, have to deal with on a regular basis. So you're right, Cheryl Smith. This idea of saying, well, he looks guilty or she looks guilty, that's absurd if you don't know the person, right?
Right. Well, definitely. I'm going to tell you something that I heard from a police officer a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about. I was no police officer has ever said that to me. Now I'm chatting with them because there's a little young brother, Orion, who is doing acts of kindness, and he was giving away thousands of books. So the officers were there to support and to protect. And the officer told me that actually something that I've heard numerous Black men say, and even Black women, that if they are driving and a police car is nearby, it impacts how they respond and react. They grip the steering wheel tighter. They slow down, and there's a certain aura that comes over them. This police officer said the same thing happens with her, and she's a police officer.
Wow.
So that means she knows that the corruption is there. She knows that folks are being treated differently. But for me, I reported a Black deputy recently, and I did it for those who don't feel empowered to do it, because he was very disrespectful to me. And I was just asking about a courtroom. He's like, "You got to get out of here." So I'm like, "Excuse me, what is your name and your badge number?" "Oh, we're not having that today." So he didn't give me that information, which he is supposed to do. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, I look forward to talking to you again." And I went immediately to a judge. I went to a supervisor, and I reported, because you would not have done that to me. And this was a Black officer. And sometimes, folks have said before, if you get stopped and there's a Black police officer, and a white police officer, we kind of breathe a sigh of relief. But you can breathe that sigh if that Black police officer isn't going to try to out police the white.
Well, look at what we're talking about today in Raleigh, right? The detective is Black.
Yeah, you're saying why? What is your self-hatred so deep? And the thing about it is, what we need to do, Stacey, however, is with all cases, we, just like we know Ahmaud Arbery, we need to start being, and I said I was going to do something in my publications with it, and start being more prominent about listing those names of these guilty names out there. Just people need to see the names. When you say, "This is a taser," "I got a taser, I'm getting ready to tase you," when you know good and well you have a gun in your hand.
Yeah.
We need to start calling their names out, and they will protect those names. You have a system, a society that will release the name, and we're getting better with it. But if a child's name is released, it's usually a Black or brown child. But we protect those police officers who do wrong and don't want to give their names out. And we need to give their name out. So we need to say Omar Abdullah. And Omar Abdullah needs to be behind bars.
Yes, couldn't agree more. You set up 15 people, ruin their lives. $2 million, as you said, just doesn't make up for it. Cheryl Smith, it was a great conversation this morning. We so appreciate you, and we appreciate all of our publishers, all of our papers throughout the country. There are 230 some odd Black newspapers in the NNPA's family. We look forward to seeing everyone at the Midwinter Training Conference, which kicks off in January at the beautiful Diplomat Beach Resort in Hollywood, Florida, January 19th through the 22nd, where the theme is the publishing industry, advancing the Black press of America, reaffirming, engaging, and empowering. Visit www.nnpa/events.com to register and reserve your hotel room. If you do that before, or by, I should say, December 12th, you will get a great discounted rate that the NNPA is providing for this beautiful, beautiful 5-star resort that we'll be at for the Midwinter Training Conference. Our Black fact of the day. On this date in 1987, James Baldwin passed away at the age of 63. James Baldwin, as you know, wrote eloquently, thoughtfully, and passionately on the subject of race in America in novels, essays, and plays. He is perhaps best known for his book of essays, in particular, Note of a Native Son, Nobody Knows My Name, and The Fire Next Time. James Baldwin lived in New York until 1948 when he moved to Paris. He returned to the United States in 1957, and from 1969, he lived alternatively in the south of France and in New York's Harlem neighborhood, and as well as New England in the United States. So on this date, December 1st, 1987, the legendary James Baldwin passed away at the age of 63. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you tomorrow.